I've got some good news and some bad news to share with you. I'll give you the good news first. We are finally getting dial telephones here in Temecula. Here it is, November 1961, and we're finally catching up with the rest of the world. Even as I speak, the General Telephone Company is installing a modern relay box on Highway 395. Now think about what this means, because now residents and merchants can have dial telephones in their houses and places of business. Slide, please. No more having your calls connected by that nosy switchboard operator who you know is listening in. But this is bad news for me because I'm out of a job. See, I'm that nosy switchboard operator. I've been connecting your calls for 43 years. Slide, please. Let me tell you my story. My name is Edna Swanguen. I was christened Edna Clara Hall, and I was born October 7th, 1896. Slide, please. My parents were Frank and Lizzie Hall. Dad was born in Michigan in 1859, and Mom was born in New York in 1872. They got married in 1890. My oldest brother, George, was born in 1894. I followed in 1896, and then my baby sister, Ethel, completed the family in 1900. The three of us children were all born in Los Angeles, where Mom and Dad owned a house on Philadelphia Street. But when we were still young, my parents moved us all to Temecula. Slide, please. Now, at the time of our move, the population of Los Angeles was approximately 320,000. The Temecula town site, in contrast, had about 150 residents. So as you can imagine, life was very different here for us than it had been in Los Angeles. Slide, please. Take school, for example. In Los Angeles, our school had contained many classrooms, one for each grade level. Whereas in Temecula, Ethel and I were enrolled at the Pujol School. That was named for Mercedes Pujol. Now, this was a one-room schoolhouse, and we only had about 20 classmates. The school had been built in 1889 and sat on a knoll above Front Street. Later on, the building was moved and was converted to a church. My family lived on Pujol Street, and Mom ran a boarding house for railroad personnel. Mom liked to keep busy. Dad, meanwhile, bought the Palace Livery Stable from Mr. Hugh McConville. This was located on the corner of Front and Main Streets. Now, the Palace Livery Stable was considered to be one of the best in Riverside County. Slide, please. Times were changing, however. Livery stables were becoming obsolete with the advent of the affordable Model T. And by 1914, the livery stable was closed and was replaced with Temecula's first bank on that corner. Slide, please. By 1915, my folks had opened a restaurant on Front Street. It was called Hall's Cafe, but the locals always referred to it as the lunchroom. Now, the lunchroom was a big deal because it was the first public eating establishment in town. When the restaurant first opened, Mom served meals for 35 cents a piece. and it was all you can eat. Many of our customers were cattlemen from Vail Ranch, the big ranch that employs several hands. We also got customers from the trains that stopped in Temecula in those days. Saturday nights were especially busy at the cafe. For example, I can remember one night in 1916 when Mr. Pharrell Freeman gave a dance. 28 couples attended, and then Mom and I served them supper at the cafe afterwards. Like I said, Mom liked to keep busy. In addition to working in the cafe, she also worked the town switchboard, which was housed in a room behind the cafe. Oh, and by the way, the Temecula post office was also located in our cafe from 1915 until 1938. So my brother George, my sister Ethel, and I all came of age in Temecula. Now, Ethel eventually left. She finished high school in Los Angeles, and in 1922, she graduated from Nurses Training School of the California Hospital there. But George and I stayed in Temecula. George was a cowhand at the Vail Ranch, and I helped Mom in the cafe. Slide, please. On May 12th, 1915, I tied the knot with my honey, Carl Swanguen. Carl was born in 1893. Slide, please. Carl's family had a somewhat colorful history in Temecula. His father, Preston, married a widow, Blanche Johnson, in 1886. Now, Blanche had had children from her previous marriage. And at some point, Preston divorced Blanche and married her daughter, Cassie. Preston and Cassie had 4 children. My husband, Carl, was their second child. Preston Swanguen was known for another reason. Perhaps you've heard of Horace McGee. He was a Temecula resident who got drunk on Christmas Eve in 1907 and murdered 2 men after an altercation at the Blind Pig Saloon. Slide, please. Unfortunately, one of his victims was my future father-in-law, Preston, who was the town constable at the time. Slide, please. Carl and I helped Mom run the cafe, and we lived in rooms behind it. Now, originally, Hall's Cafe used oil lamps for illumination, but to keep up with the times, Mom replaced the oil lamps with gas lights in 1917. And while she was at it, she added an ice cream parlor. When the power line from Murrieta reached Temecula in the 1920s, we had electricity to replace the gas lights. Oh yes, Hall's Cafe kept up with all the modern technology. Slide, please. In 1918, when I was 21 years old, Mom turned over the switchboard responsibilities to me. I manned the switchboard in Temecula. It was a Kellogg switchboard, and I manned the switchboard 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I even connected calls in the middle of the night. I trained myself to wake up when somebody wanted to make a call and then go right back to sleep. I slept with it and ate with it because it rang day and night. I was known as Edna to my phone users. If someone called me Mrs. Swanguen, I wouldn't know who they were referring to. Our telephones had a handpiece called a receiver. Each phone customer had their own numeric code, just a few digits. Some shared a code. That was called a party line. If a customer wanted to make a call, they would pick up the receiver. They would hear me say, "Number, please." I would then use that number code to connect the call. Now, it's true that I may have listened in at times. Boy, was I privy to a lot of local gossip that way. But I could be trusted to keep secrets. I didn't blab. And the job wasn't all fun either. In the case of an emergency, I had to respond quickly and keep a cool head. Slide, please. Actually, we need to go back one, yeah. Now, right there. In 1917, the United States joined in World War I, and many of our local boys got the patriotic bug and joined the cause. My brother George joined the Army, and he fought in France until the armistice of 1918. He was wounded, and at one point we took a road trip to San Diego to visit him while he was recovering at Camp Kearney. My husband Carl was not so fortunate. He registered for the draft, as was required of all men his age, but his petition to join the U.S. military was denied for medical reasons, and we always felt it was due to the appendectomy that he'd undergone in February of 1917. Now, I am truly my mother's daughter, as I like to keep myself busy. In addition to operating and helping in the community, I also managed to raise 2 daughters. Marjorie May was born in July of 1918, and her sister, little sister Betty Jane, followed in January of 1922. And being that I'm a modern woman, I went all the way to Riverside to have my babies in a hospital. When my little girls were growing up, Temecula was still a small town of a few hundred people, but we were changing with the times. By the 1920s, Front Street was paved and was part of the Inland Highway. It was later designated as part of Highway 395. Filling stations, more restaurants and hotels for motoring tourists were added. For example, Palomar Inn was built in 1927. Now, this was Temecula's first modern hotel because it had electricity and indoor bathrooms. Temecula had modern amenities, but parts of it still looked like a town in the Old West. And we still had the train that came into town, so we were fairly accessible to Hollywood. And for those reasons, filmmakers often brought their cast and crew here to shoot Westerns. Slide, please. My daughters attended Temecula Union School. This was a school made up of 2 classrooms and had about 40 to 50 students in grades 1 through 8. Graduating 8th graders who wanted to continue on to high school had to go to Lake Elsinore to do so. And here in 1961, our high school students, slide please. In 1937, Mom moved back to Los Angeles and left Hall's Cafe to Carl and me. Sometimes people trying to place calls had to wait for me to connect them because I was busy serving food. And our restaurant opened early, and so if you were lucky, you might see me serving breakfast in my nightgown. Now, I am a prolific smoker, and at times, customers may have been treated to cigarette ashes in their meals, as I smoked while preparing food. They were none the worse for it. All the local people ate at Hall's Cafe. Slide, please. The Knotts. Slide, please. The Barretts. Slide, please. The Rory Paws. Even Earl Stanley Gardner. You know, he created that lawyer character, Perry Mason, who's on the television. Slide, please. Carl and I later owned the Greyhound bus depot that was adjacent to Hall's Cafe, and this was a smart way for us to guarantee customers. During World War II, we were kept busy because buses would pull in jammed with servicemen on their way to one of the many bases in Southern California. The military liked to use the inland route because of a fear of ship attacks along the coast. Carl and I were also local Western Union agents for a while. Yeah, we were busier than one-armed bricklayers. In 1943, the California Water and Telephone Company took over telephone service in Temecula, and they offered me a salary of $30 a month. Kyle was not okay with that. He thought that my services were more valuable, and he threatened the California Water and Telephone Company with my resignation. Well, my employers must have liked my performance because they offered me a salary of $300 a month. In 1954, Carl decided that we were ready to retire from the restaurant business. I resigned under protest. What are the Border Patrol men going to do for food? I asked. But Carl assured me that there were now other restaurants in Temecula and that the agents wouldn't starve. So, Hall's Cafe closed for good on Christmas Eve, 1954, just in time to spend Christmas with the family. So with my free time, I had other pursuits. Of course, by now there were grandchildren to spoil. And in October 1954, I was made the local chairperson of the Ground Observer Corps for Temecula. Now, the Ground Observer Corps was a civil defense program that began during World War II and was resurrected during the Red Scare. Volunteers like me spotted and identified planes, and we were supposed to report them to the Air Defense Command. I continued to volunteer with this until 1958, but at that point, the United States Army and Air Force had developed radar systems to monitor aircraft. Although Hall's Cafe had closed, I also continued to work on my career as a switchboard operator until now, because dial telephones in Temecula are going to make my job obsolete. Oh well, maybe it's for the best. Carl and I have worked hard for many years, and maybe it is time to retire and enjoy our golden years among our family and many friends in Temecula. Slide, please. You know, here in 1961, Temecula is still a small, pleasant community. We haven't grown much because the Vail family owns much of the surrounding land. But I heard a rumor the other day. Now, don't say you heard this from me. The Vail family is thinking of selling off the ranch to a real estate agent. So, who knows what the future holds for Temecula? Thank you for listening to my presentation.